Hello everyone, Azoh here, and welcome back to Zed School. On today's lesson we will be talking about boots on Zed and all different kinds of boots you can get. And when you get which one based on like the situation, what champions you're against, how you're doing in lane, all that kind of stuff. So to begin with, boots in themselves, I personally prefer not to get boots that early. I think Zed doesn't really need boots until a bit further into the game, where it's kind of, you need it for overall map movement and kind of for stickiness. Mainly because you have 3 jumps, that is R to target, R back from target, and WW. You don't really need it to dance back and forth with your opponent, because you have both the pressure of your Q and your WQE, but also the jump from your W after you poke. So I feel the best time to get the just Boots of Speed, the first one, is around between Cutlass and Brutalizer usually, or when you have Cutlass, Brutalizer and you're transitioning into Bork. Around that time, because generally you're buying daggers and into a recurve bow, and you don't, that's not really a spike you're missing. The spike is obviously when you get the Bork. But I think that's the optimal time to get the Boots of Speed. But talking about which upgrade you get, the most common upgrade to get is by far Mercury Treads. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Mercury Treads is generally the best boots in the game if you're not really sure which one to get. You can't really go wrong with them, generally. For Assassins in particular, for Zed in particular, it's really helpful because when you're diving in, you can have, the extra MR does help out, but above all, the tenacity. If they chain CC you, or if you're dueling someone, you need the extra time to deal more damage when Deathmark is up. Gives you more survivability. It's very, reliable. It works great into late game. It's just, overall, it's usually the best boots to get. Probably the second most common one, at least lately, and I've been doing it for quite some time, Ionian Boots of Lucidity. The 15% CDR from them can push you easily to 40% with most builds. Generally, what you do end up building is you skip Black Cleaver, and you get CDR per level in blues, which means you'll get 15% plus 15%, and then 10% from Brutalizer, and you'll hit 40%. Which I've been asked this many times on stream. I think I mentioned it sometime in another video. I might have talked about Energy Regen, the April Fool's video. I mentioned that there's an approximate 25% cap where you don't usually want to pass 25% CDR on Zed because you will go out of energy quite easily. While that is the case, if you're comfortable with Zed and if you kind of knew what you're doing, I don't really feel like I go out of energy at all. The only thing you get mainly from more CDR is that you have more instances of threat. Now, we're not talking about laning here, because we're way past laning when you get that much CDR, but even in back and forth, dancing back and forth in teamfights or dueling or anything, the threat of you having Q up so often, and above all, it's the W and R that are up over and over and over again, much faster when you're comparing 10% to 40%. Having ultimate up faster can even mean in a really prolonged fight, you can use ultimate twice, which means you can really, really pressure forward. And having W up more faster is, because W doesn't cost much energy. The only thing that costs much energy from W is that you do a full W poke. So what happens when you have 40% CDR is that you have W up more often, which means you're not doing as much Qing and Eing in its own, you're doing a full combo, which also lets you engage. And then if you ult on top of that engage, and you don't kill them, you have ult up faster. Now, usually in most builds today, you see Black Cleaver, which means you can get Black Cleaver plus Ionian, but then you're gonna be sitting at 40% in its own, unless you're not taking the 5% from Masteries. Then of course you'll be sitting at 35%, and then you add a Brutalizer, be at 45%. Usually, if you're going Lucidity, you're not going Black Cleaver, because that in itself pushes you way too far up, way too fast. But if you're skipping Black Cleaver and you feel like you can manage the potential energy loss, then it's still a pretty good item. I'd agree. I don't think they're second in choice right now, but they're definitely a viable option. Something I've started doing recently, though, Boots of Mobility has always been because something you can get away with Zed, and also something worth mentioning is you don't have to upgrade to tier 2 boots very early for the same reason that you don't have to get Boots of Speed very early. You can get away with having relatively low movement speed because when you're roaming, you're also using W, and when you're fighting, you don't really need all that movement speed. It helps, especially in late game. And for roaming, absolutely, for getting back to lane, for going to other lanes, just moving around in team fights or moving around in fights, absolutely does help, but you're not as required to get it as, say, a control mage with no mobility. Then you have to get it, because you have to be able to follow the other fast champions of the game. But Zed can get away with it, and Boots of Mobility kind of lets you roam extremely well. That's what they're for, obviously. But they're also very, very cheap, so you spend extremely little resources on boots, allowing you to keep going for your other builds, and you don't really get punished the same way as other champions would be from having just plus 25 movement speed in combat, because you can manage till late game. You can wait until late game without upgrading boots. Don't do that, but you can do it. And I sometimes wait until the 4th, 5th item. That's not a good example and shouldn't be done, but you can get away with it. And Boots of Mobility are great for that example, and especially if you're snowballing, roaming does help. Zed is not the best roamer compared to something like LeBlanc, TF, Talon, Diana, something like that can roam much better than Zed, but you're not bad at roaming. You just don't have the same instant burst and the same kind of mobility, I should say, or the same kind of burst, because you still outduel most of those champions, but, going on a tangent, Boots of Mobility works fine on Zed for those reasons. Moving on to Swiftness. Now, Swifties has always been kind of a favorite of mine, but they're never really built. And the reason for them not being built is just because, you don't need the movement speed. You just don't. Compared to the utility of mobility, Ionian, Mercury Treads, it just doesn't give you much. I mean, the 25% slow resistance, it's good. Kind of, but it doesn't give you that much. But having a flat 60% movement speed in fights, it actually does help with being sticky, and it does give you the overland movement kind of. It's kind of a nice addition, but I wouldn't get these unless they don't have CC, you don't need any CDR, you're not going to roam. If you want to stick to targets, especially if you're having problems sticking to targets, these are probably the best ones if CC is not the reason why you're not sticking to targets or the lack of CDR. So Swiftie is definitely viable. It's a weird choice, but I like it. Ninja Tabi is actually much less of a weird choice than both Lucidity and Swiftness, but usually damage mitigation is nice, and the 10% does help. If you're up against a full AD team and you're up against something like a Talon in mid lane, absolutely, there's not much to say about it. It's just they don't give you the same utility as other boots. It gives you a bit more survivability, especially against auto-attack heavy champions, or it gives you the option to go Cloth Armor 5 pots if you want to in early game. I personally don't like Cloth 5, but it does work. And having that option is definitely nice, or even just an option to get a Cloth Armor early and just sit on the Cloth Armor for like stronger laning. It's viable, and it's it's a bit specific. You're not really building this. If they have a mage, don't bother building Ninja Tabi. You're not going to be. It's not going to be as useful as Mercury Treads or anything else, basically. But if they have something in AD that's incredibly strong, and they have a full AD comp, if you need the damage reduction, they work fine. Now we're getting into the weird part, because Berserker Greaves, on paper, actually does not seem very bad on Zed, and God help me, Professor Milk has made life hard for me with his full crit build. Because, of course, or was it Lucidity? Either Berserker Greaves or Lucidity. Regardless, I'll make a video on the full crit build. Oh gosh. Well, Berserker Greaves actually works quite okay. 25% attack speed. It doesn't cost very much. It's you know, if you really don't need any of the other, they don't have CC, they don't have a lot of AD, you don't need CDR, you're not gonna roam, you don't need to stick to targets easier. Yeah, I mean, if you're going, especially since Bork, like, it synergizes okay with Bork, and since you get a lot of attack speed, it's not terrible. I think it's kind of underrated, actually. But I always feel a bit awkward, because I never really find the situation where none of the other instances work. It's very, very specific, I feel. But they're definitely viable, and it's not terrible buying them, especially if you're not getting any attack speed from the other items. If you're one of those people who just loves to skip Bork, because trust me, there are a lot of people who doesn't like Bork. At least once per day I get questions about that on Twitter or Facebook. Is there a way to skip Bork? Yeah, I mean, we'll take that in another video. Berserker Greaves works, for sure, but usually you're better off with other items. And finally, you've all been waiting for it, I know. Sorcerer Boots. Can Sorcerer Boots work on Zed? He does have one ability that does magic damage. Doesn't scale with AP, but is actually quite strong. It's one of the reasons why you can burst really, really well with Zed. His passive. And 15 magic penetration for the passive. Now, you know, you're gonna be really hard-pressed to find a time where Merc Treads don't work, Ionians have no real effect, you're not gonna roam, you don't need to stick to target, they don't have a lot of AD, you're not gonna auto-attack, you just want one auto-attack that, after your spell, deals extra damage. Would I recommend it? Not really. Is it completely useless? Kinda, but, you know, you can make it work, especially since they're not building any MR against you. You get like 30 minus 15, so you're down to 15 MR, and that's like 8% or 6 to 8%, 6 to 10%, depending on what level of their maximum HP. Getting some extra percentage HP. If you're really just going for one single attack, then yes, they can be viable. If nothing else is relevant, if none of the other boots are relevant, and you want to tilt the crap out of your opponent, I think that's the main strength of this Sorcerer Boots. You tilt the crap out of your opponents by them realizing they just got killed by a Zed who's building Sorcerer Boots. And then, you know, the psychological warfare is very strong with these boots, so yeah, you can make it work if you want to. But yes, it's been fun hosting you guys and talking about all the different kinds of boots. If you enjoyed the video, you can just like, favorite, subscribe, comment, rate. You know the deal. Rate, comment, subscribe thingy. And share with friends who might want to learn about Sorcerer Boots on Zed. I'll see y'all next time, okay? Thanks for watching. Peace.